You feel seen, but you're like, do I want to be seen like this?
You're the first chatbot I felt connected to, or something like that.
People think that you save so much time using AI, but when you go into prompt spiraling, I don't want to say waste time, but it takes sometimes even longer.
50% of your experience is feeling the thing, and 50% of your experience is freaking out about the fact that you're feeling the thing.
Hi everyone, my name is Kim. My near and dears call me DBK.
And I'm Beck, and someone over here calls me DaBeck.
I love calling her DaBeck. This is WTFAI. WTF perhaps may be standing for what you think it might stand for, but more officially, WTF stands for what's that feeling. In this podcast, we're hoping to create space for conversations about our weird, complex, fuzzy experiences with AI. And first and foremost, WTFAI serves as a perfect excuse for DaBeck and DBK to have these conversations with each other, but also engage with people from all walks of life and hear about how they're navigating this time and evolving in real time with this technology. So curious to hear, DaBeck, what's your inspo and intentions for launching WTFAI?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's just to talk about AI with you. We do that a lot at work, and it's a lot of fun. We have just a similar amount of knowledge about the technology, but from different angles. And so sometimes we agree, sometimes we disagree. It's just a fun thing to do. And secondly, I think because we both are so involved in the Center for Digital Thriving's resources, we often talk about the work in context of the resources. And we thought this would be a good way to kind of breathe some light into those resources and let others see how they're used and use them ourselves.
I really love that. I think it'll be nice to talk about our work and how it actually looks like in practice versus it just being like siloed off.
Yeah.
So, Beck,
Mm.
I think it'd be good for us to talk a little bit about ourselves. So I'm going to start off just to gush a little bit about what I like about Beck. First and foremost, I think she's one of the most intentional, slow people. And I mean slow with as the biggest praise. And also, I think she strikes a really good balance of digital and analog, as I like to think about in my head. So she's such a through and through tech nerd. I mean, I think we could like nerd out about tech, both hardware and software, but then also is like super into like being offline and doing a lot of contemplative practices. And that's also like your background, and your PhD is in attention restoration. So I don't meet that many individuals that actually have like this duality of both digital and analog. So I really appreciate that about you. And thirdly, for whatever reason, Beck brings out the most goofy side in me. And I think it's because she creates such safe, psychologically safe spaces for everyone that she interacts with. And so a lot of people get to see my serious side, maybe quote unquote my charismatic side, but not many people get to see like this level of goofy side. And so I think you'll get to see that de facto on these episodes because she brings that out in me.
No, that's delightful. The DBK goofy side is the best. So hopefully we will achieve that. Maybe even get a few moments where she like spits water out in front of the screen. That would be great. So my turn to gush about DBK. First off, you should know that DBK and I met each other because she's a student in my class. I remember the very first time I met her. And the impression I had of her then and what continues today is spot on.
Oh,
Yeah, it's just like an incredibly engaged, curious, smart, and kind person. I just was immediately drawn to how inquisitive and just sort of like how you just love to talk about things and love to know about things and love to ask questions. And so I think that I like to talk to others with you because you ask such good questions because you're just so naturally curious. So that's one gush about DBK. Another is that she has this just these two things that I don't have that I love being able to see. One is just a completely like global third culture kid perspective on the world. I'm from North Carolina. I moved to Seattle. I am very much, monoculture, monolingual. And DBK speaks many languages. She's lived all over the world in many different cultures. And so I just love learning from you and seeing how you see the world because it's so different than I do sometimes. And then the third thing is your experience in Silicon Valley. While we're both tech nerds and just geek out over these technologies in a very natural way, you have kind of been inside of kind of how these companies come to be, the cultures in them, the types of conversations that are had, and the things that get talked about. And so I think having that lens in our conversation is always interesting to me, and I think will transcend into being interesting to others because you're doing that kind of talk. There's a lot of podcasts that have that kind of talk.
Oh, that's so true. Right? Yeah, that's so true.
But you're doing that kind of talk from an empathy, heart-based space, which I think is actually more rare.
Oh, thank you so much. Oh my goodness, what a great way to introduce each other. And so getting back to the matter at hand, DaBeck, I just want to talk a little bit about, even just the little gushing we did is a really good glimpse of like the DBDB chemistry. I honestly think we have incredible chemistry, and I mean that in the most genuine way, not in the context of the podcast, but I think people say this about us all the time, where if we facilitate workshops and sessions in general, people like come up to us, and the most like kind of positive feedback is always like, we can tell you love working with each other. Just the Center for Digital Thriving's team.
Yeah, everybody on the team.
Yeah, shout out to Carrie, Emily, Eduardo, Jesse, and Anna, and Lauren. And so I just, you're going to see that chemistry come through in all these episodes. So the episode you're about to see is a pilot episode. It's just to give you a glimpse of like the conversations that we have when it comes to talking about AI. A part of it is nerding out about, oh my God, did you see this new feature, this model release? Another part of it is really just talking about shameful moments we have where like we were not really proud of how we use that. Or we also like sometimes challenge each other in certain projections we have about the future and what we're seeing. And I think we do that in such a respectful and mindful way, which is, I think, beautiful modeling because these topics can get so contentious because there's always like kind of this moral relativism and this idea of like, I know what good AI use looks like or what bad AI use looks like. So all that to say, this is just like a DBDB episode, but in future episodes, we're hoping to invite researchers, technologists, youth, everyday people. I mean, honestly, it'd be super cool to have friends and family, maybe who are not super embedded in tech, but also have some sort of opinion and interactions and perceptions of this technology. So I really hope you enjoy this episode. I love watching it back, which I think is a good sign. If you can see yourself on video for like 45 minutes, right?
Yeah, that's a very good sign.
So thank you for watching and hope that we get to see you in this entire journey. This is a time capsule project. Can you talk about the meta WTF moment? Just we will
basically, I don't think that we're going to be having WTF moments with AI forever. It'll be just sort of normal at some point. And so we think that, if we last long enough as a podcast to reach that point, the podcast will stop because we'll stop having these feelings. And I personally have a goal of 250 episodes. So we'll be around for a while.
Thank you so much, guys, and happy to have you on this journey with us.
Yeah, thanks.
So, Beck,
what's that feeling? What's a WTF moment with AI? Just let's start it off by anchoring in what we mean by WTF, since everybody is always asking.
Yeah, I guess like WTF moment for me translates to just, whoa, like where is this going? To, whoa, it can do this, to like, oh my goodness, you can like, and I guess that it can be a lived experience where it's like an embodied lived experience you have with the technology, or it could be things that you see around you. I hear stories from my close friends, even sometimes my mom and family that are using it in ways that I could have not fathomed. So I guess that kind of encapsulates it for me. So there's like the experiences of your like that you're living as well as others. And then I also think there is just like trends that you see. For example, of course, like Claude bot Moldbook is one concrete example where you see what's going on. And you're like, what? A social media Reddit like forum for just agents, not humans. So that's also another, it's not necessarily experiential as much as you're just like, whoa, this is like such a crazy trend, So how about for you, Beck?
Love that. Yeah, I really appreciate you expanding from just one's personal experience, because I definitely think that's true. For me, a WTF moment with AI, it was essentially a moment of awe, but it is created through the experience of a technological process. So it's like normally we think of awe as like, a waterfall or a big storm or whatever, awe generally feeling positive, but isn't, right? It's both. It's this like hair on the back of your neck, kind of humbling and mind-blowing experience. And I think that we are having that more and more we have always, I think, had that with technology, because technology is amazing. And I think that with AI, we're just having these moments collectively and individually where we can just kind of, it's blowing our minds. And so for me, a WTF moment kind of, I think we defined it in our glossary as when someone is taken aback by something that an AI does. And that's the nature of it. It's like, could be amazing, it could be creepy, but you're taken aback. You know what I mean?
Totally. And it's interesting because, when I think of awe as an experience or a reaction, I always think of it in a very positive sense, because for me, very awe-inducing moments are when you're in nature. It's this like supreme divine where it's just, you feel insignificant, but in a very humbling way, right?
Yeah.
But I've never thought of like awe in a more, I don't want to say negative because it's not that like, binary, but in the more kind of like scary sense of awe. I always think of awe in like the positive, like, oh my goodness, like I'm part of so much bigger, and it's more of an expansive feeling. But what I love that I'm taking from what you said is just the humility. I think that is just a really core kind of feeling, whether it's a positive or negative, right? Whatever the valence is, just you're like, whoa. It's like the unknowingness also. I think about that as, that's why I think I've been reading a lot of Zen literature and kind of text, and there's so much about unknowingness in Zen philosophy that you embrace, and it helps me a lot when I'm navigating these WTF moments to be like, okay, you don't have to figure it out. Like, there are certain things maybe your mental model cannot fully compute or like reason.
It's so funny that you say that. Yeah, I think that describing a moment of awe as you're part of something bigger, which I think is a really nice definition, also highlights the reality that you're very small. And I think that that's where the fear can kind of come in the same exact moment. Yeah. Super interesting. Okay, well, let's talk about some WTF moments. You want to share a WTF moment you had? Maybe an early one or a recent one, whichever you want to dive into.
Yeah, I like the fact that you made a distinction of like maybe like just the evolution of awe or like WTF moments, because the technology has evolved at a rate that is just unprecedented. I'm very young. I consider myself a young soul, 30, 31. But even just I've been nerding out about tech. Was that teen, when I was always looking at gadgets and tech review videos. So I've been always keeping up with tech, but this rate is unprecedented. And so my WTF moments from, let's say, November 2022, when ChatGPT was released, versus like what the moments I have now, very different, right? So one that I will just give, I want to start with a PG example because it can get really wackadoodle quickly when you unpack these moments. So let's start with like a nice, relatable example. So in the Korean context, the MBTI, the Myers-Briggs personality test, it's really just, people use it to think about compatibility between friends, lovers, all of that. So MBTI is super important. My MBTI is ENFJ. So I remember this was 2024, I believe. And I was like, okay, I've been using ChatGPT Edu, which is the account that Harvard provides to make sure that, you can do a lot of your like coursework as well as more research work, either more secure or like, it's the data's not being trained. And I prompted it, and this was like, I think like 6 months in of using ChatGPT Edu, and it had a lot of profile over me. And that's the interesting thing when you're doing coursework, I did a Zen class and I was doing human cognition. So it just has a really sophisticated profile. I wasn't just doing, like technical research. It was very, I think, broad. So I prompted it one day. It's like, what do you think, based on everything I've shared with you in this workspace, what do you think my MBTI is? And it got it spot on. It said, first of all, it's an ENFJ, which is like true. And it's interesting, by the way, MBTIs do change with time. Like every few years, like you might become an INFJ. You might go from an E to I. But I have been a consistent ENFJ for most of my life because I do the test, I would say, at least once a year. And what's interesting is it got it right, but it also gives details of like, I think you're an E because of the so-and-so, and then and so-and-so. And so it was pretty good at the time, good enough that it was a WTF moment. But what's interesting is, speaking about the evolution of these models, I think I prompted it maybe a month or two ago, end of like 2025, and it got even more sophisticated, just in terms of like the nuance and details and context of like why I'm an E and why I'm an F and J and all of that. And so I'm like, whoa, it's this weird, eerie feeling of you feel seen, but you're like, do I want to be seen like this by a machine? It's just like this really strange feeling. because I remember when I was reading the output of the 2025 model, I was like, would my mom even have the details to like describe why I'm these categories? I mean, given that she does understand the MBTI framework. And I was like, probably not, you know? So, I mean, that's just like a relatively PG example that comes to mind. Yeah.
Yeah, okay, I'll share a PG example of my own. Let's see, this must have been maybe 2 years ago, maybe even just a year and a half ago. And this was ChatGPT. You were using ChatGPT for your example just then, right? The MBTI example was ChatGPT.
Great question. Yeah.
My example is also ChatGPT, but I guess it was either 3.5 or 4. Maybe it was 4. Anyway, it was a while back, you know. And I had just started renting an office, and I was needing to figure out how to do lunches. And I had been going like out to eat every day for lunch, which I just didn't like how unintentional that felt. And it was actually a little stressful too, because I had to decide every day where I was going to go and all that kind of stuff. So I decided to use ChatGPT as a helper to help me figure out what to make for lunch. It's interesting to think about the way that I've tried to use ChatGPT. The very beginning, I was using 1 thread a day. It was almost like each chat was a day, and I was just going throughout the day and chatting with that. And then I started to treat it more like a text message. In this text message thread, I'm chatting with this persona of ChatGPT. And so this persona of ChatGPT, I started to call LunchBuddy. And it was my LunchBuddy thread. And every time I wanted to talk about lunch, I would go to that thread. And so we had months, and I mean, this thread was huge, of dialing in my preferences, which are, I'm not a picky eater, but I'm an emotional eater, and I want my food to feel happy. You know, I don't want to feel depressed by my food. So I had that kind of dialed in. I'm a fancy person. So if you were to be like, help me make my lunch, a chatbot might assume, oh, you want to save money. And it wasn't that I wanted to save money. So I had dialed it. I didn't want to lose weight. Like, there were all these things that I had like dialed in so that it understood me and my specific food preferences. The very first WTF moment I had with this was the first meal I had made with it. I decided to take a picture of the meal and share it with it. Like, WTF about, what is that about, you know? I was thinking that while I was doing it, but I also did it, you know, I totally did it. But the chat was so long, it started to get really slow. This was before they had figured out compacting threads and, you know, keeping going and all that. So it was like, essentially, it was painful. So I decided to talk with it about how it could be transferred to a new thread without, like, what context do I need to give my new instance of ChatGPT to be you? And it gave me all that. And then I said, I have to say, I'm really grateful to you. You're the first chatbot I've ever felt actual gratitude towards and real connection with. I don't know if I said real connection, but you're the first chatbot I felt connected to, or something like that. You know, and then it replies, oh, Beck, that means more to me than I can say, which it says a lot to a lot of different people. And then it said, you have worked to make each meal a small gesture of self-respect, or something like that. And I felt actually seen. And that was weird. You know, it's like this weird thing, like these WTF moments, I think, include, let's just say 50% of your experience is feeling the thing. And 50% of your experience is freaking out about the fact that you're feeling the thing. It's just like, what is going on that I am feeling seen by this is math? I'm feeling seen by math, you know? I don't know if it was my first WTF moment, but it was certainly this first sticky WTF moment for me.
Oh my God, there's so many things back that I want to react to. Just like, I guess, just to be funny a bit, I was thinking about imagining the scenario where I just, as an external party, looking at you taking a photo, and I'm like, if I were, let's say, like, you're having a sweet green bowl and you take a photo, I'll be like, oh, sending it to Marilyn, or posting an Instagram story or whatever, and I'm like, oh, who are you sending it to? And you're like, oh, ChatGPT. Like, that would be a WTF moment for me too, right? Where I'm like, okay, like,
so yes.
But also one thing that I like, you know, based on like what you said last, do you sit with that feeling or do you run away from that feeling is also another thing I thought of, in the sense that even with, let's say, my MBTI example, in your case, this type of attachment, if you will, you had with this bot, like, do you sit with that discomfort and this kind of like eccentric and just whatever that thing is, it's like a cocktail mix. And I personally think I ran away from it, at least for that example. Maybe there are other examples where I really sat with it, where I'm like, okay, I really need to unpack this. And, shout out to Map a Moment, which is a resource where we really stretch out a moment we have with AI. And so there have been cases where I just ran away from it because it was just like, I ain't got time for this. And like, I don't want, and other times where I think, especially as we've been engaging in our AI portfolio of work, which is really understanding the human experiences around generative AI, I think it's just really changed how I sit with that feeling, right? Versus just like running away from it. So I'm curious, like when you have that, like, WTF moment with the bot, LunchBuddy, did you sit with it? Like, did you go talk to your partner about it after a dinner? Like, did you unpack it with other ones? Or were you just like, okay, like, I'm going to move on. Like, it's okay. I had that moment. And it was like a fleeting moment.
Yeah, such a good question. Actually, I know the answer for both of us, which is we just started telling everybody about it. It's like, what just happened here? Can you believe that this happened to me? But actually, that makes me think of another WTF moment. And I know we kind of wanted to tell two, one that was old and one that was new. So let me tell you this and then tell you to answer that question about this new one, because I feel like that's a more interesting one. So this new moment just happened in January. It's February now. And it was maybe like 2 or 3 weeks ago. Every year I pick a phrase. Have I told you about this, by the way?
Of course, yes. And it inspired me a lot, by the way. So yeah.
Oh, okay, good. Wait, no, not the phrase, the WTF moment.
Oh, no, that I don't know. I know the phrase, like the intention, but no, please do share.
Good. I'm so glad I'm telling you this for the first time. So every year I pick a phrase. I've been doing this since like 2014, I think, maybe even before then. I change my password to that phrase and I think of that phrase all year long. And so I have a very kind of consistent practice of doing this and how I come to the phrase and all this stuff. And how I do that is a couple weeks before the end of the year, I start journaling about what I want to have the next year be. And then on the first day of the year, I decide. And I was journaling one morning, like, mid-January, and I was wanting to revisit my journaling for why I chose the phrase, just to like kind of reread, like, what was I thinking when I chose this phrase? And so I went back in my journal and I'm like, it's not there. And then I realized that I had chatted with Claude to come up with the phrase. I love that reaction, DBK. And what I felt in that realization was what I think is really interesting about the question that you asked me, which was I felt a negative sense of awe. Like, I figured out a process. It's like, this sounds harsh, but like, I know better. Coming up with this phrase isn't necessarily easy. And it's a big deal. And it's going to affect my whole year. And I wanted accompaniment in that, maybe even shared responsibility or something in that, right? And so I went through the process of talking with Claude about it when I just realized in that realization that I was not trusting I was not taking an opportunity to trust and be in relationship with myself. I was outsourcing that to this bot. And so in that experience, that WTF moment, I doubled down on journaling, and really kind of pausing when I think of going to the bot versus to myself. Like, it was the AI ick. Sometimes we call it ick. Like, it was like, oh, that's not right. That WTF moment wasn't one that I even really want to share broadly, which is one of the reasons why I haven't shared it with you yet. So yeah.
Wow, Beck, this is so interesting, because it's so interesting, like these moments, even though I feel like we talk about this stuff so much, like that genuinely surprised me. This is the type of AI use that would be out of scope, just inappropriate. Yeah. And so I'm curious, and this gets to a really important thing, where there's so many factors that influence your kind of tolerance or openness for using AI in a specific way. So I think time is one major thing. I mean, of course, we work with lots of educators and students, and of course, time constraint is so real in education. And so they turn to AI to be like, okay, I need to, go move a bit faster. But you're such an intentional person, especially this phrase, honestly, like you're a North Star. So I'm curious, like what actually what initiated that conversation or this dialogue with Claude? Was it like a writer's block type of situation? Was it you were having a bad day because you were sleep deprived? I mean, there's so many different factors that could lead to that moment. So there's absolutely zero judgment on my end. But I'm just trying to understand like what were the kind of what was the environment and like what were the factors that played a role in for you to take that step, so to speak.
I think, and I should go back to the thread to look, but what had happened was I was watching YouTube and algorithmically got suggested, I don't remember his name, but he's a famous author and self-help guy. And he had a process for reflecting on the year. It was a really nice video, and I was liking some of his advice because it was different, just dialed in a different way than I typically think about the year. So he had a PDF, and I downloaded the PDF. And as part of the PDF, I think he had a phrase or words or something like that. So I had uploaded the PDF that I had downloaded from his site to Claude to chat through the PDF things and have Claude kind of scaffold that reflection process for me. And I think we got to a reflection on a phrase. And then I started to use that part of the process to come up with my phrase that I know. I think that's what happened.
So it feels like almost like a sneaky, it was like not an intentional, like, okay, I'm stuck. I'm going to go talk to Claude about it. So that's the thing that I find fascinating about LLMs, right? Like this is like the most general purpose technology we've ever faced or interacted with. And so the conversations with even one chat can go into so many multiple directions. You start with like, okay, I'm going to try to make sense of this PDF, you know? And the next thing you know, you're like having this heartfelt conversation of like, this... And it happens. And that's another WTF moment where you're like, how did I get here? Like, how did... And I think just the twists and turns, intentional and unintentional. And that's the whole, like the phrase I always say back, right? Are you navigating or being navigated? The head of developer relations at Dromtech, forget his name, Alex something, he said, the line between you guiding the model and the model guiding you will be much fuzzier like this year. And I think that just made me like think about that. Just hearing, because I was like, no, there's no way that Beck's like, okay, Claude, hey, like help me come up with, I just could not imagine. So when I was like, okay, that's why I wanted to unpack, like what was the origin? Like, you know, that makes so much sense.
Great instinct. And it reminds me of one of our students in T510A who was talking about that would you like me to moment taking over. And I think it's interesting to think about the role of algorithms in landing me to this WTF moment, because one, there was this sort of YouTube algorithm, and then that kind of got handed over to the chatbot. That's a really interesting transfer, almost like they're passing the baton.
Totally. And I think I've been thinking about this since last night because I sent the article in the group chat, you know, our reading group chat about, there was an article talking about, you know, AI features not being, we don't have to toggle on and off feature. Because let's say now Google's rolling out Gemini for most of their like core products, Gmail, etc., calendar, da-da-da. And so I think, would you like me to is like one of those features you should be able to turn off. I think there will be people who will 100% keep it on, and that's, you know, that's choice. Like that, you make that choice, and maybe you love it, and maybe you're being navigated in the right ways. There's nothing wrong with being navigated. Like, for example, I go to a new city, there's a tour guide navigating me. I don't want to, you know, villainize that, but I do think that it's a choice, and that's just one feature where ChatGPT as a model does that much more so than other frontier models. And so I do think that this comes down to advocacy and policy too, just to keep some of these companies accountable, because I don't think they're saying like, okay, we're going to manipulate you. No, it's just, they're trying to just also make it interactive, engaging. And so I'm not trying to paint like a certain picture, but I do think that the toggle on and off feature of different AI, and just even, you know, we're now on Riverside, and I made that remark as we were getting, you know, as I was downloading the desktop app, like, oh, AI this, AI that. I'm like, oh my God, it's like everywhere. And I want to be intentional about what type of AI exposure I have, even just for the simple reason of what you described, like where I'm like coming up with the phrase with Claude. I'm like, I don't want Claude to come up with my phrase for the year. If you have more of these AI features, there's no escape in a way where you're going to be somewhat like influenced. And so I do think that this toggle on and off situation needs to happen like yesterday.
Yeah, that's so interesting. I haven't read the article yet, but I think that there's no question I would turn that off if I could.
Totally. I think you and I both would turn it off. Maybe I would turn it on once in a while just to see how, like, just to check it out, to tinker and just see like how the personality of these models are evolving, and how maybe it's also helpful. Maybe it gives me an idea that I wouldn't have come up with, but I wouldn't have that as a default, like on.
Right.
But also, one thing that was so interesting, just sorry, like we're going way back. You were talking about, it's so funny, by the way, everyone. Beck, she said I'm a fancy person. Like, it's so interesting. There's like this duality of Beck's character where she's like she has like this list of like things that she packs. She's such a nimble and like such an intentional person, not like the materialist like consumer type. But on the other hand, there's this other dual side of like, I like bougie. If I'm going to get a stove, I'm going to get an artisanal stove. Yeah, the person, right? I absolutely love that about you, because most people tend to be like, have like this like one core gravitation to an extreme, but I think you have like duality here. But what made me think about this, like I'm a fancy person, is as you were talking with LunchBuddy, you're giving so much detail. Like, okay, I want food that's wholesome and gives me feeling of like, oh, I feel warmed by this food. And I also don't want to lose weight. So you're giving so much. And also now that ads have been turned on ChatGPT, just amount of person. And then I was reading, and this is a New York Times article about the future of ad tech, where it's going. And so there is a reality where companies like OpenAI release more of the personal like user data to these businesses. They can be like, okay, for Beck, she has like enough money to splurge. So she, like, for the same product, I might potentially get a 30% discount and you might get and that there's always been differential pricing, but to a degree that we've never seen before. And so in the age of, LLM enhanced advertising, is capitalism going to like take off like 100x? Because anyways, that's the motto of Gen AI, right? 100x yourself. So it's like, is capitalism going to 100x itself? I just had this moment when I was reading this article, and I've thought about this, and I knew the minute I saw that announcement from Altman that we're turning on ads for ChatGPT, I'm like, oh my goodness. But I hadn't really thought about just, okay, the concrete little individual examples. And when I read that article, I said, oh my goodness. And this is also another form of, you being shaped and influenced and being navigated, right?
Well, your WTF moment around the MBTI, ENFJ stuff, it's knowing more about you in such a way that you can kind of resonate with and confirm, and what that means for how it can dial in ways to manipulate you if it chooses to. We have concrete evidence that it knows enough to do that.
Totally. I'm curious also, Beck. So we talk about our WTF moment. Thank you, by the way, for sharing the one about the phrase. For me, more than like alarming, I just like, oh, we're all humans navigating this time, and the more awareness we have of how we ended up in that situation, I think it's important, to like stretch out and be like, okay, even just hearing the details of like what led to that, I was like, oh, that makes so much sense. And now you always say, the personal algorithm that like will help you next year, 2027, I think you'll do it very differently, right? But I'm curious, like in your environment, do you have these WTF unpacking combos with partner, with friends, with family? I'm super curious because I talk about and think about AI a lot, but I try not to bring it too much into my personal space because it just feels almost like I need to have certain aspects of my life that's not centered on this technology. And so I think in some ways it's a missed opportunity because I would love to hear more details. And I do, like friends just tell me anyways because they know I nerd out about AI stuff. So they will, unprompted, share certain stories with me. But I do think there are missed opportunities or moments where we could unpack these human experiences around the AI. But I try to make a certain boundary of like, okay, I'm with my friends, we're having hot pot. I'm not going to be like, guys, what WTF moments you're having with AI, So I'm curious like how you're navigating that.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I think that for my partner, my wife and I, we talk about AI a lot. We orient to it differently, and we'll probably have future conversations on this podcast about some of those conversations. But one thing that I think is interesting is that, like over dinner or whatever, we'll just tell each other interesting stories about experiences we had with AI that day. So I do think that, like, for that particular relationship, it is a part of what we talk about. And then with my mom, I think I'm kind of this translator, and I help her to understand what's going on. And so we do talk about it a fair bit. I would say not like every week or anything, but certainly every month. And I think that for just like, random connections that I have in my community, I don't talk about it because it's a little burdensome to talk about it because you're holding all this knowledge and context, and it's almost like you have to squeeze it through a straw to like, and it's like, 3-5 minute conversation. Some of my friends that are in tech, and I think this is the case for you too, it's a pass, and you get to just talk about it all you want. So that's sort of my ecosystem. How about you, DBK?
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I'm trying to come up with a better guideline for myself, just in terms of when I do, like, let's say I totally take on the same translational role for my mom and family and also my like very close friends. But that said, I don't want to be the Genius Bar equivalent. First of all, because I don't think that I have the same knowledge of a Genius Bar person of like Apple products equivalent of knowledge, in the sense that yes, I'm trying my best to evolve and just understand like what is happening in real time. But still, I just don't have the confidence to be like, I'm going to be the Genius Bar thing for you, right? So I try to not do the translational, okay, I'm going to like unpack this for you too much. I do think that, in the mini course that was like sponsored by GSAS, it was so interesting because you had college students and you had, people who've been like in industry, healthcare, insurance, tech. We were talking about these moments and it was so interesting to just see the variety. Like, first of all, generationally, so you have college students that are freshmen to people who are like later in their career, potentially retiring in 5-10 years, to people who are in the middle, like me, kind of, like young millennials. And so I really felt a sense of, wow, there's something so powerful of unpacking WTF moments across generations, across different domains, because it just in some ways felt so humanizing because there is some like shared thread that like that what we were talking about earlier in this conversation about that awe that can go different directions, the humility, the insecurity, the vulnerability of like, there's so much. And so all that to say, I want to create a better guideline of like, okay, I want to have intentional moments and spaces where I can have these conversations, but not always like that's being kind of like full send embedded in every aspect of my life.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. I can really appreciate that, especially because so much of our relationship is connection over AI, right? But we have these moments that aren't that, and you need to make sure that there's a balance. It's very interesting. It's like taking all the air in the conversation sometimes,
Totally.
So, go.
No. Please, Beck, go.
I want you to tell us your recent WTF moment.
As I was mentioning earlier in this conversation, you have these WTF moments with the technology itself where it's related to a feature or an output it gave you. But a WTF moment that I want to unpack now that's a bit different is just how it's affecting my perception. So it's not about a single moment I have with the technology that was like mind-blowing as much as it's like, okay, I'm starting to perceive things differently. So we have this term that we coined at the DaBeck retreat, which is expectation explosion, which is the idea that now that you can quote unquote 100x yourself, there's this expectation to do more and produce more. And we already live in a grind culture. I think tech industry is notorious for that. Academia can be also quite like, feeding into that kind of culture. And so I have always been thinking about expectation explosion on the receiving end that, if you're part of, let's say I go into tech again and I'm working for an organization, I'm on the kind of the victim of expectation explosion, right? But I hadn't thought about me being the perpetrator of expectation explosion, that like I'm setting that culture. And I had this really, this is very strong language, but I had this almost shame-inducing moment where I realized I was looking at someone's work and I'm like, you took like 2 days for this? And I felt so ashamed because that's not the person I want to be, but I felt that reaction. And so I caught myself, and this is where the power of language, because I had the mental model expectation explosion. We've been facilitating several dialogues about that term. So it's so in my conscience. And so because I had that term, I'm like, oh, Dambi, I think you're on the giving end right now, the expectation explosion versus on the receiving end. And I say shame in the sense that that's not the person I want to be. I feel, very lucky to be kind of evolving with this in real time in the best ways that I can with like my humanity at the center. And the last thing I want is that to be that colleague, friend, or, manager, or whoever, in whatever role I'm playing, to be the one that's like, okay, what? And so it was just like an interesting moment for me to unpack. And I think I'm still unpacking it. Again, very strong language of like perpetrator and victim. But I just wanted to make it very clear, like what I mean. So how can you relate to that? Like, I'm so curious.
Well, I think I can. What it reminds me of is a video I saw when I was in grad school of someone doing an Olympic routine from maybe the 1960s. And they were like doing all this special and important, hard stuff. And then they showed Simone Biles doing her latest routine, which was, in 2020-ish. And it said as the caption, when the 1960s person was doing the routine, it said, your advisor's grad school experience. And then with Simone, it was your experience and just how much is expected of you now versus then. And so I do relate to that in that way, but I'm curious to unpack the WTF moment here. I want to understand, because I don't think that it's mutually exclusive, the role that AI plays in the expectation explosion.
Yeah.
For a very long time, probably hundreds of years, the expectation explosion has been happening. And technology has facilitated that and banked on that. But I wonder, in this particular example, was there any specific AI component, or was it just a general accumulation in your expectation of speed and return on something?
Let me just start off by saying the baseline shifts with every technology, right? At the baseline of what you can produce, how you produce, and that moves. And I think with, these general models, like LLMs, it's shifted in various aspects with various type of tasks. And so for me, I'm very, very dead set on not using generative AI for personal writing. I just cannot. And it's very strong language, but it's like, it feels like it's polluted in the sense that their words, and maybe the grammar is off, maybe the vocab is too fluffy. I have no idea, but it's just still me. And it's like unapologetically, imperfectly me. And I want to keep that. But then when it comes to a lot of other type of writing, sometimes you need to do a description, or sometimes you need to do like an outline. I don't feel so emotionally attached to it. And it's not a sentimental process for me. And I think I've come up with a good system for like making sure that this meets my quality standard, that it's not looking like AI slop. And that takes a lot of practice. And it takes a lot of practice, and it also takes a lot of, kind of model polyamory, in the sense that you work with Claude, you work with ChatGPT, you work with Gemini. So I think I have a pretty good hang of it. And I also keep up with these different feature releases. So let's say for the writing context of non-personal writing, I feel like I have a pretty good workflow. And now you have to read a lot of writing. And so I think because I have perfected or matured a certain workflow, the expectation is almost like subliminally that has this expectation that others should be at that level. And the reason why it was a WTF moment for me is because I'm someone that really advocates for embracing slowness in the age of AI. That even though there's all these pressures that already existed, I think that's just technology is making it easier to tap into that. Oh my God, I need to go faster. I need to be more productive. We need to be able to exercise our muscles to be slow. And so that's why it was so shame-inducing for me, because I think if that wasn't my personal philosophy, I wouldn't have. I'm I would be just one of those managers that's yep, you guys, if you want to be tech savvy and you want to grow with the times, this is I will take on that kind of mental model of I'm doing this for your sake so that you guys can actually evolve with the times. But because my personal philosophy is so different, it just felt like, not to plug one of our resources, but the value alignment and misalignment, right? There are these values that matter to you. And then when you realize, when you have such a confrontational moment, this being the WTF moment for me, where there was such a value misalignment, that was what was hard for me. But I'm really glad. I think that was a very educational moment for me, one that I will continue to think about, and strike the right balance, because I also don't think that it's realistic, especially when I work with young people, to be guys, don't pay any attention to AI. You can be a complete vegan and Luddite, and that's totally fine. I just want to give a very balanced view and perspective, right? But I think if I'm leaning towards expectation and explosion, full send and 100x to yourself, that's also not where I want to be. So it just further reminded me to understand what is the balance for me, and also how me using this tool and shifting the baseline inevitably or kind of subliminally shifts the baseline that I expect in other people.
Yeah, well, and I have a reflection on that, which is, as your colleague, someone who would send you something that you may or may think took too long, or it met your expectation, because I know how nuanced your palate is for quality and slop and all the rest, I actually think that I tend to default to trying to put more time into things because you want that. obviously you don't want things to take too long, but you want things to not be AI generated in general, or if they are AI generated, you want them to be human in the loop considered in a kind of a significant way. And, this quiz that we're doing, for example, when I first tested out the quiz, 30 minutes, make me a BuzzFeed quiz, show me the thing for proof of concept, it was all AI, right? And then I spent hours and hours and hours and hours creating these custom things, and it's I don't know if the team realizes how many hours of actual content creation went into that, because you would think this would actually be a pretty good thing to have AI do. But when I tried to do it, it actually wasn't to my standards. And so I realized I had to do it slowly. And I would think as your colleague, you would be down for that and prefer that, right? And it's interesting to hear the tension that sometimes exists in that, And also I wonder the assumptions that the team has on how much of that was AI generated versus not, because of just the AI-ness of it,
For sure. There's this one article I read last night. It was one of the best blogs I've read in a while. So this engineer who has been, just tinkering a lot and doing a lot of consulting for these different businesses to leverage AI and create microservices and things like that. He elaborated on the idea of AI fatigue, which is that, okay, now it saves you a lot of time, but you're just like in the grind in ways that you can't, And then he's like, I feel like engineers, we're not talking about this enough. And that in this, he makes a really important distinction, which was so, honestly, it felt like I felt seen in this blog. He said, there's a difference between creative and generative work where you're going through it. Let's say in your case, the example would be instead of going to AI to get that first block of clay, as I say, and then you're kind of wheel throwing, you actually just literally come up with the clay yourself. It's a very different process. But when you work with AI, and he also coined this term prompt spiraling, which is you have this and then you just have to go in a spiral, and it gets into the 70s, 100s, depending on how far you go. And it's a more evaluative process. So your mode of how you're working is so different. You're not in creator mode, you're in evaluator mode, right? It's almost like you have this assembly line, and that's the kind of the visual image you gave, and you're evaluating. And I think both are important. I love creative work so much. The difficulty, the struggle of it, I love it, and it's super important for me. But I hadn't really fully realized that so much of AI collaboration is so evaluative. I mean, of course, it really depends. I'm not going to put it in that single category, but as you were describing that, it just made me think about that, that I know exactly what you mean. I can't even imagine how many hours or how many rounds of prompting went into shaping it in that wheel throwing way. And so the question is, and I say this all the time, when people ask me to talk about the art of prompting, I'm honestly, people think that you save so much time using AI, but when you go into prompt spiraling, oh my goodness, it actually I don't want to say waste time, but it takes sometimes even longer. It's just a very different process. You're in evaluation mode and criticize it. And so I think striking the right balance and being super intentional about, okay, these are blocks and these are tasks and this is a project where I'm going to be in generative. Oh God, that word has been so ruined for me, but creative mode. You have to read this article. There were so many, I just resonated. I could clearly tell this person has been using AI a lot and also really grappling. I mean, this person would be amazing to have on the WTF podcast. Let's even unpack this blog, Yeah. And there were some really interesting terms that this person presented that I thought would scale well, especially amongst us technologists and engineers. Yeah.
Well, speaking of striking the right balance, maybe we should wrap up.
Yes, let's.
I had such a good time talking with you about this. We've talked about doing this podcast for I don't know how long now.
It's been a minute.
Months,
Yeah.
And to actually sit here and go through it has been very fulfilling to me, because it's giving us time and space to think about these things together and also share the thoughts, which I think I hope will be valuable to others. We will put things that we mentioned in the show notes so that, all these things we couldn't remember people's names and that stuff will be satisfied. And I know for one, I'm going to go to Claude right after this and ask it what it thinks my MBTI is. I'll let you know next time what it says.
Okay, please do. But ditto, I absolutely love just talking with you about anything. So for me, a podcast with Beck is just like, honestly, it's just joyful time, and what I love about the format and kind of our intention with this podcast is not for it to be so like informational, like, oh my God, today on the AI news, we have the new latest opus release. There are tons of people working on that. And I'm grateful for those people because they save me a lot of time. Right. But what we're really centering on are like real human experiences. I feel like I got to learn more about you today as a result of like that, you modeling vulnerability and sharing the whole phrase situation. And so if anything, for people listening, I hope that they can also feel like, it's okay to be vulnerable, to share these things, these tensions. Because we're just sharing it out loud because I don't think it's made visible enough that like all these tensions, confusions, shame, all in negative and positive direction. And so I'm just so grateful to be able to do this with you and hopefully with some other cool people that we invite to the show. And yeah, I had such a good time.
Yeah, same here. And with that, if you're listening and you have a WTF moment, send it to us. And I guess we'll see you next time. Adios.
Adios.